So I was getting fed up with all the recent negativity and disappointments in my reading life and consequently in my videos. And I thought, what better way to counteract that than by making a favorites video. So today I'm going to introduce you to 5 favorite characters of mine from fantasy books. And by doing so, I hope I can make you curious about the books that they come from, or if you have already read them, maybe we can fangirl and fanboy together. I thought I'd start with a genre classic, and I'm already messing up from the beginning because I actually have not one but 3 favorite characters from this series. But bear with me, I will explain. So the characters are Queen Likimea and her son and daughter Jiriki and Aditu from Ted Williams's Memory, Sorrow and Thorn series. This series, it's a series only because the story is too long to be published in one volume. But the first book in the series is the Dragonbone chair, and you probably know the series under that name. The second book is The Stone of Farewell, and books 3 and 4 are To Green Angel Tower Siege and To Green Angel Tower Storm. This is a very traditional, solid, high fantasy series, very obviously inspired by The Lord of the Rings, but doing its own thing within the genre boundaries. It also, in my eyes, and as far as I remember, treats a topic very sensitively that has a counterpart in reality and that I've seen treated rather poorly in more recent fantasy books. It's, in my eyes, the best fantasy series of that generation, and still one of the best fantasy books that I've ever read. Now, the 3 characters that I've mentioned are the 3 major characters in these books, which are of the elvish kind, or rather, of the subdivision of the elvish kind in these books, which most compares to the elves of, say, The Lord of the Rings. As in The Lord of the Rings, we are in an age in this book in which mankind rules the world, or at least the continent of this world on which the story is set. And this continent has a very bloody history, of which its former population, the elf-like people, are the losers. And this experience has divided them into factions or strands almost, has divided them ideologically and by happenstance, and with time they have even evolved differently. And the people of one of those strands are most like our elves from The Lord of the Rings. And of these elves, 3 feature most prominently in this otherwise human-dominated story. Or 4, actually, if we count the final boss. And I like them all, including the final boss. I think it's actually one of the book's strongest point that the ultimately evil archenemy is actually a sympathetic character, but I don't want to concentrate on him here because it would be a little bit spoilery, I think. The other 3, Likimea, Jiriki, and Aditu, are his daughter and his grandchildren, and I have a hard time choosing between the 3 because they are all fabulous. The younger ones are a bit more flamboyant than their mother, and the mother, Queen Likimea, is a great mixture, I think, of scary and gentle and alien and familiar. But they are all 3 in the same tough emotional spot where they are caught between sides and affiliations, and they are faced with a very grave human struggle and an injustice being done within and to the human world by an aggressor to whom they historically owe their allegiance. And it is particularly tough for Queen Likimea because she is the oldest and she has memories of the time before. And it's an almost impossible choice for her to choose between even just action and inaction. But in the end, she does make a choice, and it's a very brave one. This whole series is, in fact, full of memorable, brave, and admirable characters. And while I'm talking about this, I'm thinking I should really make a recommendation video for this series alone. My second favorite character is John Granby from the Temeraire series, and I can't really tell you why I like him so much and at what point in the story he became one of my favorites, because I think it would be spoiling the first book. So I will instead recommend the series as a whole. So as you probably know, this is a reimagination of the time of the Napoleonic Wars with dragons. In Europe, dragons are used as aircraft in warfare, but in other countries and on other continents, the ways people live with dragons are very different. And this series takes us around the world and shows us these different ways of living. Now, this portrayal of different cultures can seem exoticizing at times, but what I like so much about this series is that it presents different social and societal models that have existed in history or haven't but might have, and all without portraying these cultures as noble savages. Where those societies are portrayed as more in tune with their environment and with the dragons as part of it, they are not portrayed as less evolved, for lack of a better term, but as differently evolved. And no place is naively portrayed as a paradise on earth either. On the contrary, there is always serious and sometimes seriously fucked up stuff going on everywhere, on every continent, including, of course, Europe. But in spite of that, it's also just a great adventure story with great characters. My next character is Chalan from Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight archive. I'm not going to talk too much about what this long and convoluted series is about, but it's up to this point at least, it's about people who are too busy fighting wars amongst themselves to recognize who the real enemy is. Chalan almost stumbles onto the scene in book one when she is taking up an apprenticeship with the black sheep of the royal family that is in the center of this story. She does that in order to escape hardship at home. Her family is minor nobility from a backwater part of the kingdom, and her family has lost its fortune, and Chalan gets pressured by her brothers into marrying rich and is trying to escape that. Now, she is not bitchy precisely, but she has created this persona for herself of the witty, sharp-tongued, confident lady who always has a comeback, who is always on top of the situation, and who doesn't let anything get to her. And it is in the course of the second book, Words of Radiance in particular, that we come to know what lies behind that mask. We come to learn why she has put it on and just how brave and strong and admirable she really is. I have seldom encountered a character in fantasy literature that I think deserves the label strong as much as she does. The fourth of my favorite characters is Bustas from Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles. The general conceit of this story is that a chronicler who almost takes on the role of an investigative journalist stumbles upon the legendary Quoth in a roadside inn, who was once this legendary wizard but has disappeared. And Quoth agrees to tell Chronicler the story of his life, over the course of 3 nights. And in his tale, he tells him the story behind the legend, what really went down, and how he wasn't always the big hero and was quite often actually quite the idiot. There is an absolutely hilarious episode in the first book in which Quoth tells the story behind the famous story of how he once rescued a village from a dragon. And it's absolutely mental, one of the best plot twists that I have ever read in fantasy. However, Quoth often still has his head up his own arse in some regards, in the frame narrative as well as in his youth, and for those moments he has Busters to give him a reality check. Busters is his companion slash apprentice, and he is of the fairy kind. He is fairy royalty even, and he has animal features when he doesn't disguise himself. And he has all the most entertaining qualities of his kind. He is cheeky, irreverent, volatile, flirtatious. His confidence level is through the roof, and he has all this explosive potential in him that hasn't yet erupted, but hopefully will. I absolutely adore him, and I so hope that at some point we will get the final book in the trilogy, so that we finally will see Busters in real action when the conflict that has been building up in the frame narrative comes to a tipping point. And in last spot in this video, but first and foremost in my heart, is Ronan Lynch from Maggie Stiefvater's Raven Cycle and its spin-off Dreamer trilogy. The Raven Cycle is the story of a girl called Blue who, for reasons, gets drawn into a small, close-knit circle of friends from the local all-boys prep school who are, again for reasons, in search of the grave of an ancient Welsh king in New England. It is or becomes a very convoluted story with just a wealth of magical and paranormal elements which come together at the end of book 1 to form a crescendo that lasts 3 books without ever becoming stale or seeming over the top, maybe precisely because it contains such diverse elements. And all the characters in the books are memorable and lovable and interesting, but even among them, Ronan Lynch stands out. He is the ultimate tortured hero, a bad boy with a heart of gold, and yet also just so entertaining. I love me a good, snarky asshole who tells it as it is. And it gets very clear very soon that he is the author's darling and that she was having the time of her life writing him. And that is, of course, very catching. And I'm having the time of my life reading him. I'm at this moment reading the second book in the Dreamer trilogy, Mr. Impossible, and am enjoying myself very much. And reading that book and reading Ronan Lynch has in fact inspired me to make this video. And I recommend that you give the Raven Cycle a try, even if, like me, you're quite fed up with YA fantasy, and even if the blurb doesn't appeal to you that much, because I think it's just such an original potpourri of very traditional and well-liked fantasy and paranormal tropes mixed in with some very, very original elements. And unlike so many YA authors, Maggie Stiefvater actually has some writerly ambition, and her stories are a pleasure to read style-wise as well, for me at least. So these are my 5 favorite characters from fantasy. If you are familiar with any of them, I'd love to know what you think about them, and tell me some of your favorite characters in the comments. Until next time, guys, take care. Bye!